Happy New Year, everyone. Tim here coming at you with my first vlog of 2020. As you can see, I still have my Christmas tree up in the background. Christmas was 2.5 weeks or so ago. We haven't gotten around to taking it down yet, which is fitting because I intended on doing a Christmas music vlog where I counted down my top 10 favorite Christmas songs. Unfortunately, I wrote out the script, but never got around to recording it, so maybe I'll do that one next year. What I wanted to go over today was my top 10, or at least what I consider to be the top 10 rock albums of the last decade, the decade being 2010 through 2019. And my reason for doing this, and I know a lot of different people have a lot of different tastes in rock music, hard rock, metal, and everything. And again, this is my top 10. I know a lot of other people have a lot of other bands they're fans of that I'm not huge into, and vice versa. But one of my main reasons for doing this is when I started looking at other top 10s or top 10 rock songs or whatever from other sources, whether it be iHeartMedia, Billboard, Rolling Stone, whoever, what I found is that either the lists were very generic and didn't include a lot of, metal or even recent albums by older bands. It was still your same old generic alternative rock that's been on the radio for the last 20 years. Or in the case of somebody like Billboard, I saw a top 5 of theirs, and the top 5 had 3 Imagine Dragons songs, a Panic at the Disco song, and a Lumineers song. In my opinion, when I think of rock, hard rock, metal, I don't think of Imagine Dragons, Panic at the Disco, and certainly not the Lumineers. The Lumineers are folk music. That's not even close to anything rock. That's just my opinion. But again, when I see a top 5 that includes 3 groups that I don't consider to be rock, that I consider to be more on the bubblegum pop, maybe adult contemporary, maybe even folk pop genre, it kind of bugs me and makes me think like, well, what do I consider to be my top 10? And I think some of the stuff that I have is stuff that's not going to be included in any other top 10, maybe because it's too heavy, or maybe it's because it's a new album by a classic rock band, so those just get dismissed. Even though, in my opinion, a lot of the stuff that's coming out from some of these older bands is more interesting and sounds fresher than the same old alternative drivel that we've been stuck with for the last 20 years or so, right? Or almost 30 years now, really, since Nirvana. Nothing against those bands, but Nirvana, Pearl Jam, those bands were great, but we've been stuck with that same knockoff alternative style for the last 20, 30 years now. And I think a lot of times, a lot of, great hard rock and metal gets misrepresented or overlooked completely in a lot of these top 10, top 50 lists, whatever it is. So I'm just going to go over my top 10 albums. It's not necessarily songs, just albums. So the first band on my list is a band called Burn the Priest. Now, for those who know a little bit about music and different things, Burn the Priest was the original name of the band Lamb of God. Lamb of God was originally called Burn the Priest. I can't remember exactly why they had to change the name, I'm not sure. But in 2018, they put out a covers record under the name Burn the Priest. It included some covers of some Chromax tunes, SOD. Also included an awesome version of Jesus Built My Hot Rod, the old Ministry tune. It's pretty much to the numbers, but it still gives an updated sound and still gives it that Lamb of God kick. But again, great record. My next record is by a San Francisco thrash metal band from the 80s. This band came out of the same scene that Slayer and Megadeth and Metallica came out of, and that would be Death Angel. And in 2016, Death Angel put out this record. It's called The Evil Divide. Great record. This one is actually signed, I think I have it signed by, I think that's the singer. Met him outside on the bus after the show, super nice guys. But this is a fantastic record. The standouts on this record are a song called Lost, which is a little bit, slower tune as far as pacing is concerned, but very heavy. And the song right after is called Father of Lies. Fantastic song, fantastic record from San Francisco thrash metal juggernauts, Death Angel. So check that out. Number 8 on my list. And again, please keep in mind that this is rock and metal. So I know the last two offerings were metal. This is more in the hard rock vein. But my number 8 record of the last decade is Greta Van Fleet. This is their first full-length record, Anthem of the Peaceful Army. And I know this band takes a lot of flack for ripping off Led Zeppelin and stealing that sound and whatnot. And they do to a large extent. But in my opinion, for a lot of, younger fans just getting into rock that may not have access, Led Zeppelin and bands like that yet, this is a great starting piece. And in my opinion, for rock to really rise to prominence again, it needs to go back and do something more old school rather than the same 3-chord alternative drivel that we've been stuck with for 20 years, like I've said a few times. So if this band maybe is the launching pad to going back to more of an old school, guitar, riffs, solos, drums, musicianship, era, then I'm all for it. But to their credit, while there is still several, very Led Zeppelin sounding songs, I really feel like the band kind of went in a few different directions on this album that I think down the line will get them away from, these strictly Led Zeppelin stylings and really maybe develop their own sound and style. Because there's some stuff on here that reaches well beyond, the Led Zeppelin sounding stuff that we hear on the radio. But again, standouts on this record, When the Curtain Falls, The Cold Wind is a great song, and then of course You're the One, which I think was a pretty big radio hit. But great record. Number 7, I do not have the vinyl for, but Anthrax. In 2011, they put out an album called Worship Music. This album was the first album to feature Joey Belladonna since 1990 or 91. I think Attack of the Killer Bees was the last album he appeared on. But it marked the return of Joey Belladonna and at least 4/5 of the classic 80s Anthrax lineup. Again, fantastic record. Now, my favorite record of Anthrax is The Sound of White Noise from 1993 with John Bush on vocals. I was never, I was always more of a casual fan of their 80s output. But I will say Worship Music is right behind Sound of White Noise as far as my favorite Anthrax record. Very heavy, not goofy like a lot of the 80s output they had. It's very serious, very intense, very heavy. The Devil You Know, Fight Until You Can't, The Giant, all standout tracks on Worship Music. So check that out. Number 6 is a album put out in 2013 by one of the 3 bands that, in my opinion, pretty much invented heavy metal. That would be Deep Purple. In 2013, they put out an album called Now What? It was produced by Bob Ezrin, who is famous for recording not only all of the major Alice Cooper output from the 70s, also produced The Wall by Pink Floyd, as well as produced a couple of Kiss, or actually 3 or 4 Kiss albums at this point. But Now What was definitely a return to form for them because they had made 3 or 4 records before that were very hit or miss. Now What was a complete return to form. Standout tracks would be A Simple Song, Out of Hand, Hell to Pay, Uncommon Man, which was a tribute to their late keyboard player or organ player, John Lord, as well as a tribute to horror icon Vincent Price in a song called Vincent Price. But again, Deep Purple, Now What from 2013, check it out. Let me take a little sip of my water here. Okay, number 5 on my list would be the Foo Fighters, Wasting Light. This album came out in 2011. In my opinion, I'm a huge Foo Fighters fan. I've seen them in concert a couple times. Great band. But I will say that for the most part, I find most of their albums I don't listen to all the way through. There's always tracks I skip past. Some are very hit or miss. Not to say they're bad. It's just I don't sit down and listen to a lot of Foo Fighters records from start to finish. However, this one, in my opinion, is the most focused and just best, from start to finish record that they've ever made. There's not a track on here that I don't like. Standout tracks include Rope, White Limo, which if you check out the video from that, Lemmy from Motorhead's in it, R.I.P. Lemmy. These Days, as well as Walk. So again, just in my opinion, the best Foo Fighters record, I think. Again, for me, I can listen to this album start to finish. It's fantastic. So check out Foo Fighters, Wasting Light. All right. Number 4, I do not have the vinyl for, but number 4 features another member of Guns N' Roses, and that would be Slash. He put out an album in 2012 called Apocalyptic Love. And this was the first album to fully feature Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators. Anyway, which includes 2012, Apocalyptic Love. In my opinion, one of the best albums put out by any of the Guns N' Roses members. Fantastic album. The title track is amazing. There was a single called You're a Lie, which was a fantastic track. And my favorite track on the Apocalyptic Love album was a song called Anastasia, which if you listen to, it really almost has a Paradise City feel to it. It's almost Paradise City for the current generation. But again, fantastic record. I've maintained for years that every single ex-member of Guns N' Roses put out better music during their time away than Axl Rose did with that piece of shit Chinese Democracy album. That's just my opinion. Some people love that shit. I don't. And I think the best album that came out from anybody related to Guns N' Roses over the last 20, 30 years was Slash's Apocalyptic Love. So check that out. That's number 3. We're getting down, or excuse me, that was number 4. I'm sorry. Now we're getting down to the top 3. And number 3 of my top 3 is a metal band that I got into kind of by accident. I went to a Cannibal Corpse show back in like 2010, I think it was. And I'm not a huge Cannibal Corpse fan. I'm not huge into the death metal or black metal or any of that kind of shit. You know, I'm not huge into the Cookie Cutter or Cookie Monster vocals, as I've heard them called. But I went there that night, and every other band that was on the bill sounded just like Cannibal Corpse. So after about two or three of those bands, I was a little bored. But then all of a sudden, this band comes on called Skeletonwitch. And yes, they do have the Cookie Monster vocals to an extent, but they came out and they had riffs and they had solos and they had like 3 guitar players, I think, maybe 2. But they were doing the whole like Judas Priest, like, you know, the 2 guitar players and the bass player standing around doing like choreographed moves and some of that kind of shit, you know, that I thought was really cool. And the music was very, very thrashy. So I got into them right away, you know, bought my first CD by them that night and was a huge fan of them, and still am, although they've changed singers a couple times now, and I think the vibe that I love so much on the 3 or 4 records I have is kind of gone. That's just my opinion. But number 3 on my list is their 2013 album. It's called Serpents Unleashed. They had a 3 or 4 album run there that was just amazing, but I think everything culminated with this record. It's loud, it's fast, it's produced very well, it's crystal clear. I mean, it's just an amazing record. Very thrashy, very heavy. And one thing I love about bands like this, and one thing I've always loved about bands like Slayer, is that, you know, they don't, at least at this time, they didn't bore you with, you know, 8, 9, 10-minute epic songs, you know, all over the whole record. You know, this album has 11 songs, and I think the longest one's like maybe 4.5 minutes. You know, they get to the point, they do what they need to do, and they move on. You know, and that's one thing I've always loved about this band. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think when Nikki Sixx had his radio show, The Sixth Sense, this was actually one of his picks, his album of the week picks or album of the month or whatever it was. You know, and the album did pretty well for him. I think it debuted like 60-something on the charts, you know, which isn't bad for, you know, non-commercial music like this. But some of the standout tracks would be the title track, Serpents Unleashed, I Am of Death, and another song called Unending Ever Living, which kind of starts off slow, has it build up, and then just takes off, man. It's amazing. So check out Skeletonwitch, Serpents Unleashed. You won't be disappointed. All right, now we're getting down to the top 2. And number 2 on my list, and this was very hard to pick between these 2 records, because both of these records are amazing. But like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of albums that come out by classic rock bands that just get dismissed because, like, oh, it's a classic rock band. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to want to hear that on the radio. Which I find amazing because all of these albums debut high on the charts. Some of them debut in the top 5, top 3 or whatever. So it's kind of hard for me to believe that nobody will care about a song, you know, from an old band like this, even though the album with no radio play debuts in the top 5, yet you'll play a Papa Roach song or a Seether song 1,000 times and the album doesn't even debut in the top 20. I don't understand that. But again, my number 2 album is by Judas Priest, and it is their 2018 album, Firepower. This is an amazing record. I'm sorry, just start to finish, amazing record. If you're a fan of old school style Judas Priest, this album has everything that you want to hear from Judas Priest, whether you like Stained Class, whether you like British Steel, or whether you like Painkiller. It's got everything. Standout tracks, obviously the title track, Firepower, Lightning Strikes, Evil Never Dies, Flamethrower, Rising from Ruins, Sea of Red. I mean, I just named like half the album, and I could really just go through and name the entire thing, but again, this is just an amazing record, and you should really pick this up. Again, Judas Priest Firepower from 2018, my number 2 record of the last decade. All right, now we're at number 1, and again, like I said before I did the top 10, there were bands in this top 10 that had multiple records that came out over the last decade. but I didn't want to have repeat bands. I didn't want one band to take up 3 slots in my top 10. So I really just had to decide which album by those, those particular bands, that I think, deserved a spot in the top 10 a little bit more. So my last band is Ghost. It's one of my favorite bands over the last decade. A friend introduced me to them, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. And I've been hooked ever since. I think I've seen them in concert 4 or 5 times now, including just in October at the Exit 111 Festival. Amazing, amazing, amazing band. And I'm pretty sure all their output was in the last decade. And I could have picked from any one of their 4 studio albums. And I struggled with this one a lot. And I know some hardcore Ghost fans might fight me on this and say it should have been their first record, or maybe even their second record, but it was really between their first and third records that I had to pick between as far as which one I just thought was the best record, the best rock/metal record of the last decade. And I had to go with 2015's Meliora. To me, this is just where everything came together. Everything from their first 2 records, everything from their EPs, and everything else just came together. Amazing record, From the Pinnacle to the Pit, Cerise, Absolution, Mummy Dust. I mean, just track after track after track after track. Very well produced, very well performed. Everything's very well written. And it was really one of the first times they really had a single that was really accessible to radio. I mean, they've done pretty well, without much airplay up until that time. But this was the first record that actually had a couple of singles, that were airable. Cerise was a pretty big radio hit for them. My favorite song on this record is a song called He Is, which is kind of a ballad, which I kind of think is my opinion, they made the mistake of releasing it way too far after the album had peaked. They had already put out another EP in between and everything. By the time they put out the single and the video for He Is, I think just the momentum that they had going into was already kind of lost. So I think that was a song that could have been a massive hit that unfortunately fell by the wayside because of timing. But it's a beautiful song. Again, that's called He Is, one of the standout tracks on this record, along with, like I said, Cerise, From the Pinnacle to the Pit, Mummy Dust, Absolution, Spirit. I mean, again, I could just name every song on this album as a standout track. And if you're really savvy, you can dig around on the internet a little bit and find another track called Zenith, which I think is kind of like a B-side or a leftover track from this record, another great song. But again, this is my number 1 record, Ghost, Meliora from 2015. Pick this up, you won't be disappointed. And I honestly don't think you'll be disappointed in any album that I've shown in my top 10 or even my honorable mentions. The last decade was really great for rock music. Again, this is just my opinion. I know there's a lot of people out there that are fans of The Sword and Baroness and Sleep, and Phil Anselmo and the Illegals and, Clutch and a lot of other these bands that I'm sure put out great output. It's just maybe something I just haven't gotten into. I'd be really curious to see, what other people's top 10s are. Maybe you can enlighten me and it's something I can pick up on and check out. Maybe, 6 months from now, I've got to come up with another top 10 because I've gotten into all this new great music. So, hope you enjoyed this. If you did, subscribe to my page. I am going to try to, I won't lie and say I'm going to put one out every week because I said that last year and I was full of shit apparently because this is the first video I've done in a couple months. But I do want to be a little more prolific this year and put out more videos. I've got some other topics I want to touch on. And like I said, if you like this video and want to see more, subscribe to my page. It's mostly made up of vlogs like this or really crappy disc golf videos. Check them out, see what you like, maybe subscribe. But again, everyone, I hope you had a happy new year. I hope you had a safe new year. And everybody keep rocking, and I'll see you later. Peace out.